So I was thinking this morning as I was preparing for an interview about which countries in the world are prepped, ready to quickly develop into the next quickly growing economy, and where is that country? The countries that pop. So I filtered out using the global governance indicators. I wanted a score of at least 0 for each indicator. You have one exception here. Georgia almost makes the cut with an but their political violence is a little too high, as you see on the graph above. But also, in order to grow, my theory is very straightforward. You need to have to get high income. You need to have good government, and you need to have a well-educated population. If you have those two ingredients, you will become a wealthy, developed country. And so I filtered that out. I filtered on every global governance indicator to be positive, and I said you need to also have at least a mean years of schooling of at least 11th grade, and every single one of them has a GNI per capita of at least 25,000, well, $20,000, adjusted for purchasing power parity. So the answer is that every country with good governance indicators and a well educated population is basically developed. And you find them in, well, Europe, obviously, but also Asia with Korea and Japan, obviously, Oceania, the Americas. And you basically find them on every continent except Africa for now. Why not Africa? Well, let's see here. Mauritius, if we then that is a good question. So with Mauritius, I think we're dealing with a 1 second here. Mauritius, you're dealing with, I don't know what their mean years of schooling is. That's almost definitely the problem. Um, so the reality is that this is your recipe. And if we look at our graph here, mean years of schooling and democracy, we find a clear correlation with GDP per capita as a function. And if we do it on a log, it's this my log graph. You find a very clear log, very clear exponential graph that as you become more democratic and you have mean years of schooling, you end up with more income. And you don't really have very many exceptions. Here's Kuwait, which has, oil. China is here. Corruption's holding their economy back, as well as lack of education. Turkey has the double whammy, but it's doing average for all three. But the trend line is very clear. So I did that, and I said a little more. Okay, well, what if I then said, I want a country that is very well educated, but does poorly on all global governance indicators? Essentially, you're looking at the former Soviet Union, Central Asia, Belarus, and Russia. Not surprising. Well, the Soviet Union was, of course, a dictatorship. It did invest in its people's education, which is why you see Eastern Europe has been able to grow so rapidly post decolonization. If I then say countries that do poorly on every indicator and are wealthy, I end up with Turkey and Venezuela. So Turkey is a U.S. ally, and Venezuela is a former U.S. ally that's funded by oil. So not terribly surprising in that sense. And then I said, okay, well, what if we then look at authoritarian regimes that are wealthy? They're all petrostates. Simple as that. So if you're looking at wealthy countries, you can end up with either having be democratic, low corruption, well educated, and rich. If you're democratic, low education, you'll be middle income. If you have lots of oil, and even if you're authoritarian, but if you have reasonable governance, you will likely get a lot of money. Russia is a funny one because it has, lots of oil, of course. It is basically Europe's gas station and nothing more than that. But it has so much corruption, the government is so ineffective, so much political violence, that even though Russia is Europe's gas station, it still only has a GDP per capita of around 8,000. Now, their GNI, gross national income per capita, just for purchasing power parity, is quite high, and this discrepancy shows a problem with their currency. You also find this problem when you look at Malaysia, and this is usually a sign of currency manipulation with that discrepancy. Poland, of course, is still in the zloty. Latvia is growing rapidly. Lithuania growing rapidly. Basically, you're talking former Soviet colonies and Greece, which has its own issues. But but yeah, essentially, if you want to develop into a highly developed economy, the two things you need to do is improve your government and improve your education, and the income, the wealth will come.